good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on what time you're watching. This is Alex Tomaszewska, your confidence coach, taking homepreneurs from procrastination to power. And today I have the honor and pleasure of interviewing Parul Banka, who's going to be teaching us about storytelling in business. So just a short intro. Parul is a story coach, a speaker, and an author. She helps coaches share their stories safely and with clarity, enabling them to build an aligned audience and to create the impact and income they deserve. And she loves traveling. Thank you so much for meeting with me today here on this very sunny Saturday. It's only 11. I've already been outside and sunbathed for like an hour.
Thank you for having me, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started. So the first thing I want to ask you, tell us your story. What's your story?
What is my story? If I make it to the other side of cancer, I would do everything in my power to live the rest of my life, no matter how long it is or short it is, as meaningfully and joyously as possible. Alex, that was the promise I made to myself when I was diagnosed with the most aggressive kind of breast cancer in the week of my 34th birthday and didn't quite know if I would still be here in a few months' time. And so during those 6 months, I got up every single day and made this promise to myself that if I made it to the other side of cancer, I would do everything in my power to live the rest of my life as meaningfully and joyously as possible. And then, as you can see, I made it to the other side of cancer. Yay! I think it's a gift. I truly believe it's a gift because I understand that not everyone who is touched by cancer makes it out alive. And so in my post-cancer life, when I got this gift of having a second chance at life, I just wanted to start living consciously so that I could have that joy and meaning that I aspired for when I was going through cancer. And I was still going through the treatment, but I'd kind of come out the other side. So in my post-cancer life, I just paused and took a hard look at how my life was. So I was somebody who has had a pretty normal life. You know, the kind of life you have when you go to school, you go to college, uni, work in the corporate world, work hard for performance management, ratings, bonuses, travel the world. And I loved it. And that was primarily all there was to my life. But in my post-cancer life, I didn't want just that. I wanted more. And I said, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to step away from the corporate world, despite the fact that I loved doing what I was doing.
And what was it that you were doing? Because I
used to work in the HR and in learning and development.
I see.
Yeah, and I specialized in something called as talent management, which was all about growing and retaining talent in large corporate organizations. And I loved it. But now I said, I'm going to only focus on the work that brings me meaning and joy. And when I looked at everything that I did and everything I enjoyed, coaching stood out. And so I decided that in my post-cancer life, I'm going to set myself up as a coach. And then the question came, well, coaching is good, but what are you going to do as a coach? What are you going to focus on? Because there can be so many things that you can focus on. And that's when I again referred back to my life and dipped into what I was really passionate about. And there were 3 threads that came up to my mind. One was my experience of growing up in a highly patriarchal society, wherein as a girl, I always had to do a little bit more. I always had to be more to be seen and heard. And even though I wasn't even the girl who was denied any opportunities, because I was very fortunate to be born to my parents, it was still hard for me just because I was a girl. That whole struggle of being seen and heard, it was a big thing. I also grew up in an environment where I saw a lot of social disparity. So people coexisted peacefully in my part of the world, but they were necessarily not inclusive. So based on the different demographic factors, such as the financial status of people, the color of the skin, the religion they followed, and what is called the caste system in India. People would exist in these silos and they would exist peacefully, but they were not really part of each other's life. And because of this disparity, the interesting equation was that there was often an implicit, well, there was always an implicit and often even an explicit hierarchy. So there were people who were considered bigger, better, worthier. And there were people who were considered smaller, tinier, punier. And, this difference had been going on not for years or weeks. It had been going on for generations, for centuries. And over a period of centuries, you know how it happens? These people said, oh, we don't see and hear you. And these people started saying, yeah, don't see and look at us, because this is what our place is.
Yeah.
And as somebody who was growing up in this environment, I could just see that this disparity wasn't right, because calling somebody bigger and better is not right, and calling somebody smaller and punier is, that's not how things should be. And so even as an 11-year-old, I could see that this was wrong. And I made a decision and I said, I'm not going to subscribe to this idea.
Subscribe. I love that word.
Yeah, obviously I didn't have that language then. I'm sure I thought of a different word,
Yes.
But then as an 11-year-old, I said, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is plainly wrong. And this is something I'm not going to follow in my personal life, because as a person, I stood against the idea that people should go through the motions of life without being seen and heard. Because these people, when they were pegged here, they stopped seeing and hearing themselves. And that just keeps people small.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, when I went through cancer, I got to a point that even though I had survived cancer and come out the other side, my confidence was hit so badly, because there were so many changes that happened in my life in a very short span of time. So my body had changed. What I could do with my body, that had changed completely. I changed mentally, I changed emotionally, my relationships had changed. My financial situation was a big joke when I was going through cancer. And I had all these big questions that I had started asking of myself, the kind of questions people ask when they have just been through a life-changing event. And because of all these changes happening in a short span of time so quickly, I just lost my confidence, because, hey, every time I stood in front of a mirror, I just didn't know this new person who was looking back at me.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know this new person I had become. And so I did what somebody with very little confidence does. I went into hiding.
Right.
Because that was the moment where I stopped seeing and hearing myself, because of how I changed in my post-cancer life. And yes, I was very grateful to be here, and yet it felt hard. So you see, in my experience, I understand what it is like when we don't see and hear ourselves. We go into hiding, and then we just stay small and we stay hidden, and we don't recognize our value. And I have seen what happens when people don't see and hear each other. So as far as being seen and heard is concerned, I have both the experiences of being on the outside as well as being on the inside. And so in my post-cancer life, when I decided to be a coach, and the question was, what am I going to focus on? I said, this is what I'm going to focus on. If I can help people be seen and heard, it is going to directly impact their worthiness. Because when we see and hear ourselves, we step up. We don't stay small, which means higher worthiness. And if, as a coach, I can do that, if I can help people believe in their worthiness, or that's the best gift I can give them. Because from then on, they can do whatever they need to do in their life. And so as a coach, that's what I do. I help people be seen and heard. And the tools that I use are storytelling and public speaking. So for me, storytelling and public speaking, they are tools that enable people to see and hear themselves, so that they can go out and do what they've got to do, so that the world can see them. So that's what I do.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing so openly. I love a story of transformation. Have one on myself. And you also wrote a book about it, right?
Yes, I did. I have a copy here. My cancer journey, a rendezvous with myself, because uh, I I journaled my entire cancer journey and my journey of transformation, all this journey of transformation wherein I said, no, I'm going to step away from that life and start a new life. That whole process of change, not so much from a career perspective, but from the perspective of changing as a person. That's what I've journaled here.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's so to read that, your thoughts. Wow, that's such a privilege to be able to do that, to read someone's thoughts as opposed to just a book that was written afterwards. Um, so let's talk about storytelling. So you teach that, you coach people at storytelling. What is the value that the storytelling brings to the business? Why is that important?
Okay, there are a couple of things that we need to understand when it comes to storytelling in business. There are lots of ways in which storytelling can be done, and every story coach that you would meet would do it slightly differently. What I focus and super specialize in is our personal stories. So
Mm-hmm.
when I say storytelling, what I help people with is how to incorporate their personal stories into building their business. And that kind of intrigues a lot of people because they say, hey, this is business we are talking about. What does my personal story have got to do with building a business?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say everything, especially when you are a small business, when you are probably the only person in your business, like I am, and probably you are, Alex. We are our business. And that is why, for us, who we are stands out as the branding, as the values for our business. So, whatever our story is, it even can be seen as the underlying story of a business. And therefore, and if we look at the whole concept of stories, well, a personal story is the most intimate, it's the most vulnerable kind of content that you can possibly share with your audience. So every time I share a part of my story,
Mm-hmm.
I share a small part of my life with them. For example, I just shared with you my experience of growing up in a socially diverse but non-inclusive environment, and my own struggle as a girl growing up in a patriarchal environment, and my whole experience of going through cancer when I stopped seeing and hearing myself, and my confidence took a hit. When I share these stories with you, you get an insight into my life. You find out who I am. This is me letting my walls down, letting my guard down, and letting you into my world. And so instead of looking at all the information that says, oh, these are my credentials, this is what I do, what I do is I shorten that process, I expedite that process, because hey,
Mm-hmm.
I am willing to be vulnerable, letting my guard down, and I let you into my world. So what we establish is human to human connection.
Mm-hmm.
I would say a lot of business owners try and build their business the hard way. So what they would focus on is the skill. They would talk about what it is they do, the whole CV resume kind of approach. And
Yep.
there's nothing wrong with it. It works. It's perfectly fine. I just feel it's the harder way to do it. Because behind that resume, behind those credentials, behind those titles, there's a human being sitting. And if you and I can stop getting distracted with all of that information and straight away reach out to that human being and make that connection, the whole process is just going to be so quicker. And in the process, we'll also find out whether or not this person is our kind of person, whether we are a good fit or not. Because if our stories don't resonate with each other, then there is a very high chance that we wouldn't really enjoy working with each other. And so everything is just quicker and easier. So that's one thing. That's a huge thing that people don't understand. People don't bring themselves enough into their business. And I would say, especially in the kind of work that you and I do in coaching, bringing ourselves into our business is so powerful, because people don't just buy coaching, people buy it from somebody. People look for that transformation and they buy it from somebody they know, like, and trust. And in coaching, trust is so important, and we can just shorten and make everything easier through storytelling.
Yes, it's like they say, facts tell, that's the CV part, but stories sell.
Stories sell. Yeah, absolutely. And since the beginning of time, that's how human beings have connected with each other, through stories.
Right, exactly. The writings on the wall, that's the oldest thing that has existed, really.
Yeah.
Through ages. And it's sometimes, I guess we forgot about that, in business, but it's coming up. Like you told me when we were talking last time, that business was perceived differently 10, 20 years ago, and now we're shifting into this storytelling. So it may feel uncomfortable for a lot of people still, but it's becoming the new normal. I guess it is already the new normal, right?
Yes. Now people really want to see the real us. Before we had this need as business owners to maintain a certain impression, we used to call impression management, image management, those kind of things, those kind of phrases were rampant in the business world. But now it's all about being authentic. It's all about being relatable. It's all about finding threads of our own stories in someone else's story. So it's more human now. That's my view of it.
And it's also a brilliant way to stand out in the crowd, because you're not talking about facts and things that other people do, It's like being a teacher. How many teachers are there, right? But each of them has a different story, and then you can connect through that story with your audience. So this is the way to stand out from the crowd. So I would like to hear some tips for our audience. How can we craft our story? I'm assuming that first you need to discover what this story is, really, and that's probably a very tough process. It might be tough. You might need to come to terms with some things about yourself, and then how to tell it. So what do we want to tell there?
Okay, so when it comes to sharing our story with a specific purpose, I would say it has three main steps. And you have actually, in a different language, in a very simple language, said all three. So the first step is finding your story. Because, hey, we've got to know what a story is, right? Because if we don't know what our story is, then there's no chance that we can go and share it. So a lot of people know bits and bobs from their stories, but a large majority of people struggle when it comes to looking at the whole of their story and sharing it as one concurrent message. So that's the first step. The second step is, well, I've got my story now, but am I okay with it? Do I accept it? Do I own it? Do I feel shame and guilt? I mean, what is it that I feel? Because, hey, if I don't own my story properly and wholly, there is no chance that I will have the courage or the inspiration to go out and share it with someone in the world. It'll just not happen. And so owning your story is the second big thing. That's where a lot of work happens through coaching. And the third step is actually going out and sharing your story. So that's when you look at, all right, this is my story, and I've got to go out and share it with the audience, with the world. And that's when the whole aspect of public speaking comes into picture. So that's when you start thinking about things like, okay, this is my story, but what is it that I want to achieve out of it? So what is the purpose of my story?
Right.
How am I going to engage with the audience? What are some of the things that I will do? Because everybody speaks differently. Everybody has a different way of doing it, because, hey, you want to be you and I've got to be me. We don't want to become clones of someone else. So how am I going to engage with people? A very important aspect would be to consider, how am I going to make my story relevant to the audience? It's my story, but depending on what I want to achieve and who I'm talking to, the exact content will differ. The focus will differ slightly. Then I've got to look at things like, oh, what are going to be some of the mini stories that I'm going to use? For example, if we go back to the story that I used in the beginning of our conversation, I gave you 3 mini stories about growing up as a girl, about the social dynamics, and my experience of going through cancer, and how all of them came together to change things for me, to bring out the biggest transformation in my life. So what are some of those supporting stories I would give? How am I going to organize my talk? And then how am I going to do it in a way that's me?
Right.
So these are some of the considerations. Yeah. But like you said, there are 3 very clear steps. You've got to find your story. You've got to own your story. And then we go and share our story. If we don't know what our story is, and if we haven't owned it, there's no way we'll do the 3rd step as powerfully as we could.
Right, absolutely. So, you know what I'm thinking now after you shared these 3 steps? Can we give something to the audience that will leave them actually thinking, so that they maybe can sit down with a journal after seeing this and start crafting that story? So, how do you find your story? What do you look for? Do you go through a timeline, or how do you even begin, finding your
Okay.
story?
So it's a very interesting process, and it does take a while, but it's a very rewarding process, and it's totally worth doing it, putting in that effort and time. There are a couple of ways in which you can do it. Obviously, you can look at the timeline and then arrive at your story. But the challenge with that is the more number of years you have, the more content you have to deal with. And a lot of people would find it overwhelming, considering, oh, I've got 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years. How do I wrap it up in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, which is the typical time that's available to us to share our story at a business event or a networking event, or even on video, because LinkedIn caps videos at 10 minutes. So 5 to 10 minutes is a pretty good timeline. So timeline it's doable, but it's the harder way to do it. A simpler way to do it is to imagine that you are sitting outside your story. So this is me watching my story, which is my life, and picking up the common themes. So it's like this. Alex, what was the last movie you watched?
Oh, I watched a movie yesterday. Wait, what was that? No, sorry, that was a TV series. Okay, last movie I watched was the movie that I've discovered recently, and I've already watched it 4 times, because that's what I do. Fortunately, my partner does the same thing. It was Fool's Gold with Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey.
Okay, hold on. My next question to you is, tell me, what was that movie about? Tell me in 1 or 2 sentences.
Oh, this is about looking for treasure.
Looking for treasure. And do they find it?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so this is exactly what we want to do with the movie of our life. You watch the movie of your life and then summarize it in 1 or 2 sentences. So if I ask you, Alex, what is the movie of your life about? We don't want 10 paragraphs at this stage. We just want to understand, what is that 1 thing or 2 things that you will tell? Is the movie about hope? Is the movie about transformation? Is the movie about kindness? Is the movie about forgiveness? Is the movie about a treasure hunt? And then we apply everything else that I said before, and then arrive at the
I can
story
see
of
how
your
that
life.
challenge, because most people, when you ask them about themselves, they just, start rambling.
Yeah.
And it just takes hours. Wow. That's a good one. I love that. I think I'm going to do that again. Yeah. Awesome.
Oh, you could actually come and join me on one of my story challenges.
All right. Tell us
This
about
is the
that.
process I take people through, because it's an intense process. It's a complicated process. And I'm on this big mission to help people find their stories, so that own their stories and share their stories. And I know that this is where people get stuck, because it's the hardest bit for them. Where do I start and how do I find my story? And so in this 5-day challenge, which is a free challenge, people come and explore their story with me. And by the time they walk out, they have a story that they can use over and over again, to build their business.
That's awesome. So is that challenge on Facebook?
That challenge happens on Facebook. We have a separate group that gets created for every new challenge group. And I do it a few times a year. So the next one is coming up in June, which is starting on the 22nd of June. And it's always a 5-day challenge. So 22nd until 26th June, that's when we are going to run it. And we are going to find our story. That's when, as a group of business owners, primarily coaches, because I work primarily with coaches. And we are going to discuss everything when it comes to storytelling, public speaking, and personal transformation coaching. It's a week when I make myself available for free to my audience completely. I mean, I literally live in that group for a week. It's amazing.
Amazing. It's great that it's coming. So the interview is going to be out soon, the 22nd of June, guys, remember that. And so we'll put the links to the challenge and to buy your book as well under the video. Everything will be down there. I'm sure it's just going to be, you know, not just writing the story, but it's going to be a journey through your life. So I'm actually very excited about that. Thank you so much for sharing. So all the links will be underneath. Is there anything else you want to share with the audience, just to finish?
I would say just go out and share your story, because that's the best way in which you can stand out from the crowd. And I know Alex touched upon it. But the way you stand out from the crowd is there are lots of people who might be offering what you offer from a skills point of view. But what you do, how you do, and why you do what you do, no one else in the world will have the exact same combination as you. And that is why when you lead your business message through your story, you are going to build an audience that resonates with you, and you are going to stand out from the crowd. You will stop being the crowd. So that's what I would say. Just go ahead and do it.
Right. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And guys, thank you for watching. This is Parul Banka and Alex Tomaszewska. See you in a week. Bye.
Thank you, Alex.